Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday, and welcome to the Veritas Group webinar, Three Steps to Create a Transformational Mid-Level Program. I'm Kendra Loper. I'm the Director of Client Services here at Veritas, and I'll be working behind the scenes today to help you as Jeff and Lauren present. And before I introduce them, I want to make sure you know how to use our webinar system. Because the number of participants we have today, we won't be able to take your questions out loud, but please use that little box at the bottom, that question box, to add your questions as you think of them. We'd love to take your questions after Jeff and Lauren have done part of their presentation. So just enter them as they come to your mind, and we'll take a look. And at the end of the presentation, we'll get to as many of those questions as we can. I'll also be answering any quick questions I can as we go along behind the scenes, just so we can get to as many as possible. And just so you know, we'll be sending you a link to the recording of this webinar later this week, along with a download of the slides as well. So be sure to check that out. All right, Jeff, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Kendra. Great to be with you all. Tuesday, it's like mid-May here, right? But we were just talking before we started that a lot of the countries experienced a lot of heat, humidity this week. I read today 38 states are going to be under this hot, humid weather for the next couple of days. So if that's you, stay cool. If it's not you, you're lucky. I'm Jeff Schreifels, principal and owner of Veritas. I've been doing this a long time now, and hopefully some of the things we've learned or I've learned over the years, we can pass on to you today. So, Lauren.
Hi, everybody. I am a client experience leader, and that means that I have the honor of working with our clients directly with our frontline fundraisers, helping them get to know their donors and build really authentic, real relationships and help their organizations do really great things. I live in DC. It is rainy, but not hot here. So I guess I will take that for now.
All right. All right. Now, before we get started on today's topic, I just wanted to share a little bit about who we are at Veritas. Some of you on this call might be pretty familiar with us, but for those who aren't, our vision is to help nonprofits create a culture and fundraising approach that creates transformational relationships with their donors. And this dynamic is critical to the system, structure, and strategy that we have found to be successful in mid, major, and planned giving programs. And we believe that for your organization to achieve your mission, you need to shift how you see your donors and their role in your organization, but that you also need to create partnerships internally and within your community. We've worked hard to ground our approach in objective fact, not just our personal opinion. We've formed our recommendations through insight from an analysis of millions of donor records and our work with thousands of fundraisers and leaders. And we've gotten to work with some pretty phenomenal organizations over the years who have helped us learn and develop our strategy and approach.
So, I want to tell you a quick story today about a mid-level officer that I coach. At the end of December, she received a call from a donor who decided that he wanted to make a first-time stock gift of about $3,200. Plus, because of her outreach, he had realized that two programs that he cared about were actually part of the one organization that she's at. So he split the value between those two programs, becoming a first-time donor to one of those. Fast forward 2.5 months later, and he called again to let her know that he wanted to give another gift of stock, this time probably valued at about $5,000. The gift officer and the donor went back and forth on some of the details, and then the stock market dipped a little bit. And so the gift officer was preparing to kind of have him say, I'm going to step back, I'm going to delay. But about 2 weeks later, he emailed her to let her know that she could expect a gift valued at $10,000. So since this donor had his first outreach from this mid-level gift officer in September, his giving had gone from $700 in the prior fiscal year to over $13,000, all in less than 6 months.
I love that story. And with that in mind, our promise to you is this. If you follow our advice today, You'll gain the tools and strategies that can help you create meaningful relationships with your donors that will ultimately lead to increased giving across your mid-level donor pool. And we've had the pleasure of working with hundreds of nonprofit fundraisers and leaders, and we know how mid-level programs can really transform your work with donors. In fact, we've calculated results for key clients. Before starting a mid-level program, they had a value attrition of 45%. And after 1 year, their average revenue had increased by 15%. That's a major swing from losing revenue to increasing revenue. And that's just one measurement.
When we work with our clients and train participants in our online academy, we use this data-proven, disciplined system and structure for effectively managing your donors. We'll talk through these steps here in a moment, but here's a quick overview of the process. In mid-level, we start by creating a caseload of donors that meet a certain criteria and then tier them. These criteria differ by organization and at what threshold your mid-level program starts. Once a caseload is identified, donors should be tiered into A, B, and C. Then you move into the introduction series before transitioning into strategic touchpoints. These touchpoints are customized by tier, so your most personalized communication is going to go to your tier A donors. All along the way, you're doing regular analysis, evaluation, and potentially moving donors to major gifts, or maybe even back to direct response. So let's go back to this first part of that structure, which is building the caseload. So when we work with organizations, this is how we approach building a mid-level caseload so that the fundraiser is working with all the best donors. First, as I've already mentioned, you get a pool of donors that meet a pre-established criteria. Then from that pool, you pull a group until you reach your target caseload size. So typically in mid-level, we recommend caseloads of 500 to 700 donors, though we always start on the lower side of that. You should definitely not start at 700. So as you prepare to tier your caseload, you'll be looking at revenue, available contact information, and other key information that you have about the donor. So the first step that we want to discuss that's key in your approach to mid-level donors is to create this tiered caseload. So I want to take a moment just to discuss tiering a little bit further, because this is such a critical part of a successful mid-level program. So in mid-level, tiering is primarily driven by revenue. So I typically look at revenue for the current and prior fiscal year when determining tiers with clients that I work with. They are designed to help you focus your energy and your time so that you really have the highest impact. So in the higher tiers, you're doing the most personalization, and that's where you should spend most of your time. An important note in all of this is that tiers are fluid. As you learn more about the donor, you can and should move them if that information indicates that they should be in a different tier. Same thing with giving. If a donor is in tier A, makes a bigger gift, bump them up to tier, or if a donor is in tier C and makes a bigger gift, bump them up to tier A so you can start personalize that communication and that outreach a little bit more. So here's a visual of what we mean by when we're tiering your caseload. So as you can see, tier A has the smallest donor count. They're kind of at the top of the pyramid. And that's where you're focusing on highly personal strategic moves. And your focus when you're working with those tier A donors is to learn more about their passions, their interests, to retain that donor and to lift their giving and ultimately move them into major gifts. When you're deciding who should be in tier A, one of the most important considerations really is how likely is that donor to move to major gifts. It may take some time to identify this, but looking at the revenue, their past giving trends, and any information you have about their passions will help you get there. So when we think about tier B, a large part of the focus is really identifying those donors who can move up into tier A. So here you're looking at interest, capacity, potential. And then tier C is where most of your donors will be and really has the least amount of personalization. As you learn more about the donor, you can begin to adjust and consider moving them up into tier A or B as you know more. So once you've tiered your caseload, you're ready to begin the mid-level introduction series. So this is a really key step in the process of engaging with donors in mid-level. This series helps you learn if the donor does or does not want to engage, helps you learn communication preferences, identify correct contact information, and then hopefully begin to give you a little bit more information about that donor's passions and interests. So keep in mind, this is happening over a period of time. You're working in batches. The introduction cycle may take 6 to 7 months to complete, but throughout it, you're giving donors the opportunity to connect with you when and how they want. And by the end of the series, you'll likely have connected with about a third of your mid-level caseload. Your outreach should be a mix of mail, phone calls, emails, small group video meetings, maybe tours, or other options so that donors can engage with you and you can help build a relationship with them. So many of these probably sound pretty similar to the kind of communications that's used in major gifts. So when you're thinking, what am I going to do? How should I build this? How should I think about this? Your major gift program can offer some really great resources and ideas for you. So at this point, let's pause, set some clear expectations and goals for your mid-level program. So as you think about your outreach, you should think about your communications as a 1-to-some ratio. So let me explain what I mean about that. 1-to-some lives in that place between mass mail, which is 1-to-many, and major gifts, which is 1-to-1. In 1-to-some, your goal is to make the donor feel like it's a 1-to-1 relationship, but really find efficiencies in doing that. So in a mid-level program, you're aiming to find and learn about the passions and interests in an effort to help build this two-way connection with donors. And then through that work, you're likely to see a giving increase. Like the mid-level officer that we talked about earlier, as you build those relationships, you'll learn what you can about the donors in order to identify which ones, should be moving into the major gift program. So let me remind you, this does not usually happen right away. It's a process. I tell my clients all the time, mid-level is a marathon. It is not a sprint. You are not going to move everybody up into major gifts all at the same time. But I will tell you also, the number of additional gifts you get just through this introduction process may surprise you. Even when I tell my clients to expect it, somebody's going to send in a check, I always feel like they're surprised.
I know.
So
I feel like, Lauren, in our Slack communication channel, every day there's something about a mid-level donor in there about how they used to give 500 or 1,000 and now they give 5,000 or 10,000. We get a
absolutely.
ton of those just from that introductory series. They're not even
Yes.
asking at that point.
You're not asking. And one of the steps in the introduction process, that survey step,
Yeah.
everybody that I have worked with has had a donor who has either used the envelope that you send to them to mail back a check, but not the survey, or to
Yeah.
include a check with the survey.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's always the ones that surprise you too. I mentioned earlier that our recommended caseload size for mid-level is between this 500 to 700 donors, kind of depending on a number of factors. And of course, that's fluid because you'll have new donors coming on, maybe as they qualify into that. Some donors being moved off, maybe they've moved away, and some donors who are going to be moving up into major gifts, and then some donors that your team will be continuing to cultivate further. So when you're in this process, it's important to recognize that really only about 1 in 3 donors out of your entire caseload are going to engage with you in, a two-way relationship, which means that means about a third of your caseload are going to respond when you email them, pick up the phone when you call, or otherwise engage at some point. So that's just something to keep in mind. It can be frustrating at times, but just know that's the expectation that you should set for yourself. Through all of the information that you learn from these donors, a large role of the mid-level program really is to identify which donors want to build a deeper relationship with your organization. If they want that relationship with you and their giving threshold or their capacity is at that major gift level for you, then they're the perfect donor to move over to your major gift program. And then the major gift officer does not have to spend the time qualifying them because you've already done that for them. So, to reiterate my earlier point, a part of what you need to do before moving a donor into major gifts is to build that two-way connection with them. And that can all be done as part of your mid-level program.
Yeah. The core of our philosophy is based in this idea that when you focus on the donor, focusing on that relationship, the money will follow. And when you're committed to learning the donor's passions and interests, you can begin to tap into a deeper, more meaningful relationship. Unfortunately, most nonprofit organizations out there have a transactional mindset where their focus is primarily on the money, not the donor. And this shows up in an attitude from leadership, metrics, and throughout the organization. Here are just a few of the most common examples we see of transactional fundraising practices. You have systems that don't support the donor journey. This can be something like having a slow gift processing that delays your ability to thank the donor for their gift, or sticky internal processes that make the transition of a donor from direct mail to mid-level to major gifts really challenging and clunky. Another example, you primarily communicate with donors about giving. And this means your communication strategy is out of balance, or you may be relying exclusively on your direct response vendor. Now, remember, we love partnering with direct response. We just don't want you to rely totally on them. And rather than incorporating meaningful touch points that report on impact, tell a changed life story, share the need, the goal here is to truly connect to the donor to your mission. You aren't incorporating the donor's communication preferences and interest into your communication strategy. And this might look like a mandate that every donor gets a particular marketing report, even if it doesn't relate to their interests. Now, I want to come back to my earlier point about pursuing money at the cost of the long-term relationship. This approach can have dramatic impacts on your donors and ultimately how much revenue you can raise for your mission. Donors don't want to be treated like ATMs. They're tired of not feeling valued and appreciated. This kind of thinking has probably already cost your organizations thousands or even millions of dollars. Continuing to approach fundraising in this way is just very detrimental. In a transactional approach, you may get some large gifts, but the donor won't feel honored or seen as a partner, so you'll struggle to build a long-term relationship. We had one client who shared a story of a donor who gave $10,000 and then didn't hear from the organization for 5 years. No one contacted them. And after an MLO, mid-level officer, contacted them, he said, "I felt forgotten and unappreciated, and no one shared how the students did who received my scholarship funds." Can you imagine not stewarding a $10,000 donor? And it's not just large gifts that need proper stewarding. To some of your donors, $1,000 or $2,500 feels as significant as $10,000. And at the end of the day, this results in minimal or stagnant growth because you aren't properly nurturing your donor relationships. So what does it look like when you do move into a more relationship-focused strategy where you're treating your donors like partners? Well, you honor the donor's inclination, communication preferences, and passions and interests throughout your strategy and communication with the donor. You regularly report back on the impact of the donor's giving and take the opportunity to celebrate the donor. You see the donor as part of the greater community that is coming together to achieve your mission. You see them as a real partner in this work. And internally, when you're relationship focused, you don't have unhealthy competition or silos. Everyone is working together to further the mission and doing it as a part of a community. Now that you're thinking from a relationship-focused mindset, you can begin to authentically learn your donor's passions and interests. The real goal here is to know your donor's story. Curiosity is key, but you need to be tactful with it. You should be genuine, and you should be using permission-based asking to ask the donor if they're comfortable sharing. It feels a lot better to be asked, "I know you've given to our summer food programs every year for the last 5 years. Would you mind if I ask some questions to learn more about your passion for that program than it does to be asked, why do you support our summer food programs? It's also important to remember that every donor's passion and interest has a driver behind it. As you build trust and continue to learn more about the donor, you want to better understand the driver because it's ultimately the key to unlocking how you and the donor can partner together to support their philanthropic interests. Here you can see some different examples of a driver versus a passion and interest. For example, you may have a donor who's passionate about education, but the driver is that they were the first person from their family to attend college, like I was. The driver is really the heart piece and can be a powerful part of your relationship with the donor.
Jeff, I like to describe that as the why of the why when I'm
Yes,
talking with my clients.
yes, absolutely. I love that. Now, here's an overview of the various kinds of touch points we use in our communication plans to engage donors in different and meaningful ways. As you learn the donor's passions and interests, you'll also be looking for ways to tailor touch points. You really want those touch points to connect meaningfully to the donor. It's important to note that you don't want to just be sending out a bunch of touch points like an in-house mail vendor. You want to be sending out information that's relevant and of value. That's how you'll get the donor engaged and build trust. Now, let's discuss another important part of the mid-level program, the overall communication plan. As you're creating your plan, there's some key things to do to help you manage your communication with mid-level donors in a manner that will prepare the donor for the kind of relationship they might have in a major gift program. You can see here how we've taken the tiers we talked about earlier. Use that to shift your plan according to tier. For example, you can see under phone touchpoint protocol that the protocol for calling starts with the most attempts to tier A and then descends. This is to keep the focus on top tier donors who are most likely to move to major gifts while continuing to manage and engage with the rest of the file. This is a very similar approach to what we recommend with major gift caseloads. You want to mix in different contact methods and types of interaction and engagement so that you're actively cultivating and stewarding your donors, showing them the impact of their gifts, learning more about their interests, and putting opportunities to give in front of them. This is a critical part of how the mid-level officer who I shared that story was able to connect with this donor and move them from giving $5,000 to $15,000. The mid-level officer was attentive to the donor's interests, shared impact, and provided relevant and valuable content.
So for step 3, I want us to dig in a little bit deeper about the idea of sending meaningful and relevant communication. So we touched on this just a moment ago, but if you remember the story that I shared at the beginning, the donor wasn't receiving any personal communication from the organization before the mid-level officer reached out and learned more about the donor's interests. That's because they weren't giving a lot of money. But because this mid-level officer reached out and had this connection and it was meaningful to the donor, they engaged and they increased their giving. So in mid-level, the key to figuring out how to personalize is really thinking about this from a one to some perspective. So that's where the tiering that we talked about comes in. But there are lots of ways to make communication really feel personal to the donor. So one of the top tips that we like to recommend is really to pull from existing resources that you already have. Add notes that will highlight things that are relevant to the donor and the things you know about them. This allows you to use something that already exists and then make it feel more personal and thoughtful. You can also call to follow up on something that was sent out. Ask about certain components to learn more about the donor's interests and what may be most meaningful to them. So one of the touchpoint types that we want to highlight in this, it's a great way to provide this valuable information to your mid-level donors, is this problem or gap statement. The idea with this kind of touch point is that you're educating the donor about the need of your organization and helping build awareness. Initially in mid-level, you may not know what the donor really cares most about. You're doing a lot of different things you don't know which one resonates the most with them. So these kind of touch points are really a great way to start uncovering that for you. So here's a great example of what a problem or a gap statement can look like. So they don't have to be fancy. In fact, doing something time sensitive and kind of in the moment can really have even a greater impact with the donor than a really slick, glossy brochure. So in this case, the client was a food bank. And so when this news clip came out, they shared it with the donors to speak to the gap in funding that was going to be coming as a result of this increased need. One of the other touch points that we talked about, or that was on the chart that Jeff shared a little bit earlier, is a YMAD, this "you made a difference." It has a number of different kind of options that are part of that. And one of them is this impact reporting. So when you create impact reports, you're looking at sharing how a gift was used and then the status of the project. So this can reaffirm with the donors that they've really made a difference and that their gift is being put to good use. So I'll share an example of a really formal impact report and then how a mid-level officer can use that. But I really want to reinforce that you can report on impact in a variety of ways. They do not have to be this fancy marketing material. I've had a gift officer who's really just shared like a quick text, like, I just came out of this program meeting, and I wanted to let you know this is how we're going to be using some of these funds, and you're really making a difference. It could be a photo of supplies that were able to be purchased. That can just be really incredible for a donor to understand, I've done this and this is what happened with it. So this piece I really love for a ton of reasons. First, you can see on the left-hand side, they shared an overview of the donor's annual gift amount. And then they also shared this cumulative giving. So the donor could see the full difference that they've made for this organization over their entire giving time. I also really love how they highlighted certain areas of the work that the organization's doing and shared a story to really showcase their work in that specific continent. So this organization also included a QR code so the donor could watch a video of the impact, which I think is a really cool thing. Obviously, when you're sending a hard copy, you can't see things in motion. So finally, the other way that this was great was that it was personally sent from each mid-level officer and included their name and contact information. And they even hand wrote a note on this. You can't see this on this one, but they hand wrote notes to the donors on these. So really a great YMAD. And then the last touch point that we want to highlight today are these transformation stories. These are really powerful. It's a way to make numbers and information about a program feel really real to a donor. So here is a really great example from a public media client of ours and how they took a story and made it feel personal and like a one-on-one connection. And I also want to call out to attention, if you're reading this, where the fundraiser asks if the donor wants to hear more on this topic, is asking for feedback. It's a great way to learn the donor's passions and interests and then respond accordingly. It may even open up, a longer conversation than you would have been able to get otherwise.
Awesome. All right, so let me ask you, if I had a way to teach you how to create touch points that would have high impact with your mid-level donors, like the mid-level officer story we just shared today, would you be interested? Okay, I see a lot of hands going up. Well, we have our next session of the year of our best-selling certification course in mid-level fundraising starting on June 9th. And this course provides a comprehensive training on the system and structure you can implement to create and grow a successful mid-level program by establishing critical data systems, integrating the fundamentals for effectively and efficiently managing mid-level caseloads, including evaluation and reporting, and smoothly transitioning donors to major gifts. And here is a note from our Veritas Group alumni about how this course impacted her organization's mid-level program. What Beth is basically saying is that this course gave her everything she needed to create a successful mid-level program because the process and the structure we teach helps you identify your donors' passions and interests. If you're looking to grow or start a mid-level program and take your work with your donors to the next level, this really is a course you don't want to miss. And if you want to get the $200 off our upcoming course, which starts on June 9th, go to veritasgroup.com/courses and select certification courses in mid-level fundraising. And then use the coupon code 513 special on the registration page.
Good. Goodness, that is so much good information. Thank you, Jeff and Lauren. We have a lot of questions coming your way, so I hope you're ready.
All right.
Ready.
All right, so here we go. Let's start here with you mentioned the introductory series. When you're talking about the introductory series, are you talking about potential donors or all previous donors, and how do you cultivate these donors?
Go ahead, Lauren.
Yeah, I recommend, and our recommendation is to always use your current donors. Your best donors are the donors that are already giving. Prospecting is not going to be where you're going to find your best donors. You'll get best responses from donors who have given recently. So, starting your mid-level program in January, right after your calendar year end giving, or if you have a big campaign, that's a great time to reach out to donors to start building that two-way connection. But yeah, we would recommend using current donors and looking at that, and then, kind of going back. Maybe they didn't give this year, this current year, but they gave last year, or if they gave for a very long time but had a lapse, you can go back to them if you need more donors in your caseload.
Yeah.
That's good. So we've had several questions about the surveys that we've talked about. So let me ask this question first. You've mentioned surveys a couple of times. I'm curious if you have info or data on how effective surveys are. What is the typical primary objective with a survey? And he's asking because personally, he's surveyed out. We all feel that, right? Ignore survey, and he ignores survey requests. Most stores now include survey requests with their receipts, et cetera. But how do we think about surveys at Veritas?
Yeah. So first of all, you are not the donor. As a fundraiser, I always tell other fundraisers, you're not the donor. So I know you may not like surveys, but if done well, donors love them. And the main objective of these surveys, it's a tactic to get donors to respond to you on a few things. Their communication preference, maybe find out what their overall interest is in your organization. It's not some long, drawn out survey. It may be 3 or 4 questions. What you're really trying to do is get the donor to engage with you and find out some information that can help you, especially on the contact side, that you get some, their email or phone number. That's really important. So it's really a tactic to get them to respond to you.
I would also say maybe a shift for you is to change the word survey to a questionnaire. And I know that can, and then don't tell your marketing team that you're doing a survey, because they're going to want to add 40 questions onto it. This is that one to some relationship. This is just for your use. You're reaching out so that you, as the gift officer, can communicate with the donor how they want to. So thinking of it just in that little mental shift of like, this is for the donor's benefit. This is not for the organization's benefit. A survey is for the organization.
Maybe we should change this to, a simple questionnaire instead of survey.
Yeah, we often do talk about it.
Everyone thinks it's long, drawn out, and I don't like doing those long surveys either.
Right.
But 3 questions, 4 questions. Yeah.
Good. And Jeff, you talked about a couple of the questions, but Lauren, why don't you get a little more specific? We've had one question about, what information should we be collecting? Jeff, you mentioned communication preference. What else should we be asking, Lauren?
Yeah, communication preference. The big things that you want to get out of this are, how does the donor want you to communicate with them and communicate with you? And what do they want to communicate about? What do they want to hear about? And then I think everything beyond that is kind of gravy, right? If you can find out what other organizations or types of organizations that they give to, If there's something that they want to, like I always recommend leaving like a free space of, what should I know about you? What was your first reason that you gave to us? Something that the donor can share a little bit of a personal aspect of themselves. And then if you have a planned giving program of any capacity at your organization, you should include a question of, something along the lines of many donors have included our organization in their estate plans. Would you be interested in learning more about it? I have already included organization in my estate plans, not at this time. And I have had a mid-level officer, not the same one as before, who uncovered in her caseload of 600 donors, she uncovered 60 previously unknown planned gifts for that
Wow.
organization.
Wow.
I mean, so there's
Yes,
there's a
great
lot
idea.
out there. They luckily have a good planned giving program that she can turn those leads over to, but that's something that I would definitely recommend if you can.
Awesome.
Wonderful. Okay, Jeff, we're going to start with you on this one. And this is a
Okay.
question we often get about our process for moving a donor through a mid-level system and then up to major gifts. So, curious about your stance on allowing mid-level officers to continue to grow a mid-level donor through to major giving with strategic guidance from a major gift officer to honor and continue to grow that relationship built rather than passing off the donor to a major gift officer.
So we would do this under under some circumstances where it just made sense to keep that donor with the mid-level officer. Like, for example, you might be a local nonprofit that you've already connected with and you've seen personally, perhaps. Or there's so many donors already in the major gift program and they haven't hired for major gifts. And so there's some people that are waiting. So instead of moving them into a major gift portfolio, where they might not get a lot of attention because those portfolios are already full, you would keep them with the mid-level officer until you're able to move them. But the idea is that eventually a major gift officer will have much more time and and go from a one to some, as Lauren was talking about, to a one-to-one relationship. And that's where we see giving go way up. Um, but there are some circumstances where you might want to keep that mid-level donor with a mid-level rep for a time, depending on the relationship and everything else that you have going on. I don't know, Lauren, if you have any other further thoughts on that.
The only other thing that I would add is, and this everything that Jeff said, and the internal side of this is it's a career growth. If you have a mid-level officer who would like to become a major gift officer, giving them keeping some donors as part of that. But the understanding is those donors are going to take more time, which
Yeah.
means that they're not going to be able to have as large of a caseload. So there's a trade-off.
Yes.
Um, but if you're looking to help grow somebody within your organization and their skill sets, that can be something else that you want to look at, you can consider. But the trade-off is that they don't have as much time. And so you need to take things off of that mid-level officer's plate.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
That's good advice, Lauren, and Jeff. So there's a few questions about how long a donor should stay on a mid-level caseload. So I'll start here with this one. And either of you could jump in, but how long should a donor be on a mid-level portfolio, even if there's no contact from the donor at all, and that donor is giving at the mid-level threshold? Do we keep them on just for stewardship or move them off to focus on other potentials?
Well, I mean, if they're not moving into major gifts and they continue you continue to retain their giving and or inch them up a little bit every year, yeah, I mean, you want to keep them. Remember, in a very robust mid-level program, we see between 3 to 4% of donors every year moving into major gifts. Well, that means that 90 some percent, 96% of those donors are staying in the mid-level. And remember, the metrics for mid-level, the three key indicators are keep, lift, and move. Keep those donors, retain them, lift their revenue per donor if you can, and then move as many as we can up into major gifts. But some of those major donors might stay in the mid-level program for a long, long time.
Yeah.
As long as overall that portfolio is providing a good ROI for the organization, then that's okay.
The number of times that I've heard, a donor finally shows up to something, or a donor, 2 years later reaches
Yeah.
out and says, "Oh, I've been reading every touch point you send me. I am consuming what you're
Yeah.
sending me. I'm just not responding." Um, Unless you absolutely have this backlog of mid-level, donors that could go into your caseload, you should assume that even though they're not responding to you, they are reading your emails, they are listening to your voicemails, they're reading the letters that you mail to them. And all the time that you're doing that, you are keeping your organization top of their mind so that when that solicitation letter comes, they're ready to give. They know that they're making a difference.
Right. That's good.
Yep.
So this is related, but a little bit of a different slant. So we tend to have a lot of mid-level, high-end donors that move up within the mid-level threshold, but then they get stuck in that pipeline and we can't move them, we can't seem to move them up to a major donor level. What are some tips to help us migrate more of those donors from mid-level to major gift? Jeff, you want to start?
I think that the answer really is to continue to be persistent and patient with those donors, because what you're trying to do ultimately, especially if they're in that A level and you're trying to move them into that next in the major gifts, you're really trying to find out their passions and interests. Because we know that if you do that well and you find the driver of those passions and interests and you gain the trust of that donor, their giving will go up, especially if you're doing a good job of presenting them offers that will inspire them to give because of those passions and interests. So that's your job as a mid-level officer with those. And that's all you can do, presenting those donors with those compelling offers that will inspire them to give at higher levels. Um, and so if you do that well, you will over time start to see their giving go up. But again, there's some donors that aren't going to, and that's okay. We want the donors that do, to move up. And, for those that are going to stay, as long as they're continuing to give, that's okay.
Good. Lauren, I'm going to point this to you. It's a little bit of a nuanced question, but they're asking a little bit deeper question about what Jeff just spoke to in terms of how and when, and why you would move a donor to major gifts.
Mm-hmm.
At what point in communicating with a donor on a mid-level caseload, other than their giving has increased to major gift level, what other factors would you consider are indicators that this donor is ready to move to a major gift level?
Well, a very obvious one is I want to get more engaged. I want to learn more. I want to make a bigger difference, right? Like we're all looking for those donors who say that. And if you have not yet had a donor say that to you, I promise you that they do. I hear clients say that all the time. Somebody says, like, I've just been thinking how I can get more involved. Other triggers that I would look at are kind of these financial triggers of, they give through a donor advised fund, they give through a family foundation, they even an IRA QCD gift that they give through, indicating that there's kind of more wealth there. Things like they have multiple homes, they take big vacations, they don't have children or grandchildren. So you might be thinking longer term, kind of bigger potential gifts, but also planned giving for that one. And then, so those are kind of the financial things that I would look for. And then that engagement, right? They're active, they're coming to things, they're responding, they want more, they need more touch, from you. They're taking more time. Those would be things that I would look at. Jeff, anything that I'm missing?
I think you've hit them all. Yeah.
It's
All of
like I do
those.
this for a living.
I know. You're
We've got the
you,
experts on
you
today,
must be
folks.
really good with your client.
Okay, here's a question about a donor. What if we have a donor who, through the donor portal, is saying they don't want any communication? They don't want phone, email, or anything through mail, hard mail. How do you keep them informed without offending them? Jeff, you want to jump in?
Well, I would honor that donor's wishes. Um, and then, continue to keep track of their giving behavior, even though you're not sending them any of the things that they said they didn't want to get. Um, I mean, in my history of hearing from donors and saying what they don't want, sometimes, they say, I don't want to see any mail. And then you ask further, like, well, what about our newsletter? Because we're giving you information about what your gifts are doing. Would you like to receive those? And they say, well, okay, maybe the newsletter, and so you might want to ask further clarifying questions when they say, I don't want to receive anything. So you could ask them a little beyond that, like, are you sure you don't want to see this or this? And then if they don't, then, honor their wishes, of course.
Yeah,
That's what we're
absolutely.
about.
I was going to say, I think one of my our colleagues had a gift officer who used the language of, would it be okay if I called you from time to time? You don't have to answer. I can just leave you a voicemail, which really takes the pressure off of that donor of like, I can just
Like that.
send things to you and you
Yeah.
don't have to respond, but still feel the information. So I think to Jeff's point, I think it's worth a follow up, get some
Yeah.
clarification, use that permission based asking structure to make sure that you're honoring what they say, that you really do just want to understand that how
Yeah.
they want to engage, and maybe they get everything they need from some other way and they're going to still give, and then you
Yeah.
just honor that.
Hmm.
You bet. And Lauren, I see a follow-up in the chat I want you to address on how we advise fundraisers, particularly new fundraisers to an organization that come in and see maybe an indicator on that donor's record that they've marked no mail or no outreach. How would you advise that fundraiser to think about those notes?
So I think a lot of those are usually solicitation based, not engagement based. And it's again going back and asking clarification. Hey, I
Yeah.
wanted to check in. I'm here to be your representative. I noticed in our records that you had indicated that you didn't want to receive emails. Would it
Hmm.
be okay if I emailed you directly, that you're not getting our kind of bulk mass emails? Or
Yeah.
did you know that we send a newsletter out and you haven't been receiving that? Would you like me to send you a sample so you can stay up to date on those things? And really just checking in, making sure that you understand what their intention was, so that
Hmm.
you can make sure to honor that.
Hmm.
Good
That's
advice.
great. I love that.
So here's a question about small shops. We work with organizations of all sizes, very large down to one shop wonders, right? And
Yeah.
so, how do we advise in small shops, particularly if they maybe only have one or maybe two fundraisers, and maybe they're working a hybrid caseload where they've got both mid-level and major gifts. What can they do, or what should they think about? What are the critical things in their team that they can really do to help make sure that they're moving donors through mid-level, but also thinking about that major gift potential?
Hmm. Well, I usually say to all of those folks, even if you're one person, you can have a major gift and a mid-level program. You do need to decide, though, how much of your time you can devote to it. That is critical because that will allow you to understand how many major and how many mid-level donors you can appropriately cultivate and steward. So let's say you have 10% of your time can be major gifts and 10% of your time can be mid-level. That means you can essentially work with 15 major donors and about 50 to 60 mid-level donors. and work on them in a way that you will actually have the time to do the right stuff with them. And that's because full time is 150 donors for major and 600 donors for mid level. So 10% of your time, essentially, that's how many donors you can work with. But you have to be very disciplined to make sure you actually carve that 20% out for mid and major during the course of your week and month. And that's why you need a plan for those donors. That's why you have to tier those donors even. Because when you're working on a hybrid kind of situation, it requires a lot of discipline and focus, because obviously you've got a lot going on if you're a one person shop, but you can do it. It just takes a lot of discipline to do it.
Great. Okay, Lauren, this is going to come back to you. Talking a little bit more detailed about tiering. I know we shared that slide, but in this particular situation, a mid-level officer has from about 400 to 500 donors, and right now only has tier A and tier B. How many donors should be in tier A and tier B? And then if they establish a tier C, what would that look like?
So tier A should be 10 to 15%. So if you have 400 donors, that would look like 40 donors or so. And then your tier B is 35 or so, and then the rest is tier C. And really I mean, your tier C is going to be the bulk. And I know it's really hard because you feel like, oh, I'm not giving them enough attention, but I promise that you are giving them more attention than they would be getting if they were not in a caseload. And it's really about using your time and what you're able to do to best serve the donors. And it's not like once they're in that, they're not like in a box that you can't move, right? Like you're gonna find out that your tier A donor is like, I love you, I'm committed to you, I'm gonna give you this amount of money, this $1,000 a year forever until I die, and I'm not going to give you any more. And you're like, great, I love that. And I'm going to put you in tier C because I know that I don't have to, like, there's no movement there, that I'm still going to reach out to you when I think of something that you're going to like. I'm going to send it to you, but I'm not personalizing all that communication. And then there's a tier C donor that maybe does start to show some interest, responds to all your emails, picks up your phone call, starts to give a little bit more, and then you can move them into tier A. So just remember too that your tiers really are fluid, and it's not like you have to sit down twice a year and move them. You can do that real time. It's, just guidance on the amount of in each one.
Good. Okay, Lauren, back to you on this one. What happens if we started an intro series and then it fizzled out because of the holidays, end of year, all of that focus? Where do we start again?
Well, I would start with kind of owning that, actually. I would reach out to the donor and say, hey, I reached out to you a couple of times, before the end of the year, didn't get a hold of you, would love to talk. So, really depending on where you were in that kind of first follow-up, you only got one follow-up in, or you just sent the letter and didn't do the follow-up, just own it. Just say, hey, I reached out to you, really looking to connect. If you got through those 2 or 3 touches after that first intro letter, reach out with a touch point, with a note, just jump in. I know that it can feel really overwhelming. And then you have like this sense of like, oh, I can't do it. And it goes on, like, just jump in, just do it. We have these expectations, right? You know that chart, you know how quickly they're supposed to move. The donor doesn't know that you were supposed to contact them 3 times and then send them that's for you. That's your discipline to make sure that you're communicating with donors. Just jump in and start again. Start with that touch point, move on with that questionnaire, the survey, and use the follow-up in that, and then get started. This is all so they know your name and know who you are. And so just getting back into that will help.
And don't get discouraged because I know, in fact, tomorrow I'm speaking at this symposium in Philly, and last year I spoke there. And when I went into the room, I had two mid-level officers come over to me and say, I want to thank you because we took your mid-level course and you did the whole introductory series thing and you said something about 7 touches. And I know for sure if I hadn't seen that, I would have only maybe done 2 because if they're not going to contact or if they're not going to, connect, then they're probably not, they don't care. But I stuck with it. And he told me like, be patient, be persistent. And I can't not tell you how many donors at number 5 and 6 touches reached out and finally said, hey, I got your message. And they said, that was the best thing in the whole course that I learned is to stay patient and persistent because had I not done it, I would have just given up and I would have just said, these donors really don't want to connect.
Yeah.
You bet. Okay, so I'm going to end with this question, and I love it because it is so real. And we've all experienced this at some point, either with clients we've worked with or ourselves in organizations. But I'm going to put this to both of you. Can you suggest language for reaching out later rather than sooner? In this case, the department was recently reshuffled and donor stewardship really suffered during that period. We don't want to use that as a reason or excuse, but what should we say when we're now starting to reach out to our donors?
Lauren?
So again, I think that there is some amount of honesty that you can have while being true to your organization of, hey, I know you've heard from people, there's been some changes, and I'm your contact. I think too, again, kind of like what I said earlier is, when we're in an organization and we're part of a bunch of change and a bunch of things are happening, it's really easy to internalize that and assume that kind of everybody knows what's happening, even for donors that are really engaged with your organization, that they know all of the things. Donors are not as involved as we think that they are. They may not have even noticed. So I think that that's the other thing that I might have, I might just say, keep in the back of your mind is that, donors may not notice as much as you do, or may just assume that it's kind of a natural thing. But if there's been, something that's been in the news that you do know people have said, I think that you can kind of touch on it, but then move forward, right? That your organization's still doing great work, that you can talk about that work and how important donors are to making that happen.
And be open to saying, hey, I can answer any of your questions,
Yeah.
And be honest and open.
That's right. That's right. Transparency is so important, right? In our communication, we're
Yeah.
humans and so are they, right? We all
Yeah.
we say, hey, we goofed here, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, okay, everyone, thank you for being here today. I'm seeing some notes that the link I sent in the chat is not working, so we'll make sure to get you the right link when we send you the follow-up email. So look for that there. But I just want to remind you that you will receive that recording of the webinar this week with the slides as well. Make sure you write down this code, 513 special. That's what you want to use to get your $200 off when you sign up by next Friday. And as always, we're always available to assist you with any questions. You can email academy@veritasgroup.com. We're happy to help at any point. We hope to see you in our upcoming course, and take care.